Here they come.
All right, so we're good to start?
No, just you only have 2 attendees so far.
Okay, you can see this.
Yeah. Here they come. $12, $14.
Yeah, so we're just waiting right now for everyone to be able to join the webinar, and then we'll get started right away here. All right, I think I'm gonna get started, and then as people join, we'll just welcome them. So thanks everyone for joining our webinar. This is our first webinar of 2021. It's been a few months since we were able to directly connect with network members. Today we wanted to update our members on progress to date, and then also open the floor up to any questions that our members may have. We'll go through some housekeeping items before we jump into the webinar. So we have 60 minutes for today's webinar. The first 40 minutes will be reserved for a presentation from our team, and then we have 20 minutes saved at the end of the webinar for questions. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar, and we'll answer them, as I said, during the last 20 minutes. We encourage everyone to use the Q&A function to ask questions publicly. And then if you want to use the chat function, that'll keep your questions or comments private and directed directly towards us. Dr. Francois Lamontagne and then Bree will be moderating the comment box today. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I would like us to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local and Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. And then I would also like to thank the Canadian Critical Care Society and the Canadian Sepsis Foundation for lending us this Zoom webinar platform, and then the Canadian Institutes of Health Research for funding our network. So with that, I'll go through a little bit of an agenda here in terms of what we'll be talking about. As I said, the first 40 minutes will be us kind of talking to our network members. So those are the first 5 bullet points that you see. We're going to start with introductions from our network members, not our network members, sorry, ourselves here as Sepsis Canada leadership. We'll then go into an overview of Sepsis Canada, which might be familiar for some of our members, but we want to make sure everybody has an understanding of what exactly Sepsis Canada is. Then we'll go and give everyone a communications update. We'll give an update on projects and programs and where we are with that. And then we want to highlight 2 programs that have had quite a bit of progress in the past few months. And then, as I said, the last 20 minutes will be reserved for questions. Next slide. So with that, I'll start with Dr. Alison Fox-Robichaud introducing herself.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. As many of you know, Francois and I started this journey over almost 2 years ago now, planning for the network to start. I am a critical care physician at McMaster University.
Hi, I'm François Lamontagne. I'm a clinician scientist at the University of Sherbrooke. Thanks for joining.
And then, hi everyone, my name is Nubia Zepeda. I joined the team in August of 2020, and I'm excited to continue working here with our network and then hopefully eventually meet and directly work with all of our members here.
And I'm Bree Chauncey. I joined Sepsis Canada in September as a communications assistant, and I look forward to connecting with everyone.
Okay, next slide. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Fox-Robichaud so she can give us an overview of what exactly Sepsis Canada is.
Next slide, please, Bree. So the development of Sepsis Canada really came out of some work done by the Global Sepsis Alliance with the WHO in allowing sepsis to be declared an important world health problem. Out of that, the World Health Assembly set some guidelines for their membership countries, and as a result, the CIHR institutes, by 4 institutes, funded this massive network that we are. We have, as you see at the top, a logo now, and a mission that really highlights our interdisciplinary network, a vision that was put together in partnership with our patients, Suspect Sepsis, Save Lives, Support Recovery, and really 5 high areas of focus, really understanding the causes and the incidence of sepsis to improve the prevention of sepsis, the detection of sepsis, improving the management and improving the rehab, which are areas that our patient partners have really suggested is important for those recovering from sepsis. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the organizational structure, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time in there, but to suggest to say that with the CIHR, we have created an international advisory board from all aspects and the pillars of CIHR. That the executive committee as it stands is Nubia, myself, and Francois. We report to a steering committee that is made up of members, team leads, and other partners. We've really tried to make that steering committee as diverse as possible. One of the things that we have done in the last little while is to have some of our trainees as observers. You'll see some other council committee members that we'll highlight later on, and a patient council that is really taking off recently that Nubia is going to talk about. We decided to take the CIHR pillars and really build them into 3 teams. But they have an overarching series of themes. That is capacity building. We're looking for the next generation of scientists. Really hoping that all of our teams are patient and family centered, and we have patient partners identified on each of them. I've talked a little bit about the equity, diversity, inclusivity, but this is increasingly important that we make sure that all of our teams are diverse. We're acknowledging that the teams may be somewhat siloed into the CIHR pillars, but we're hoping that we see increasing collaboration between teams, including knowledge exchange, and overall we're looking for research excellence. Team 1, as it stands, is really to deal with population health and understanding the incidence of sepsis. Team 2 is really thinking about and improving the long-term outcomes. Team 2 focuses on sepsis awareness, both for the general public, but indeed for our health professionals as well in terms of the surveillance and the early detection of sepsis. Team 3 moves from understanding the pathogenic mechanisms of sepsis from a bench to bedside perspective, and then developing and allocating cost-effective therapies, which we hope by the time we get through this in the next 5 to 10 years will really be based on a better understanding of an individual's risk for sepsis. Next slide, please. We need to acknowledge all of the partner organizations, network and societies, and industry support for our organization. And this is growing. We've added a couple of new ones here. I want to really highlight the partnerships with organizations that you may not have been involved with before, particularly the Canadian Frailty Network, Diabetes Canada, Stem Cell Network, and the Canadian Donation and Transplant Network, who really have been integral in terms of helping us set direction. We're working on the partnership organizations, and we'll highlight these 3 right now, but Francois and I and Nubia have been very busy looking for other industry support and partnerships as a part of our sustainability plan. And then as you can see, we really go from coast to coast with all of our academic institutions, but also some health organizations as well as hospitals. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so
Back over to Nubia to talk about what's been happening at the patient council.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, so in terms of our patient council, we have approximately 20 sepsis patients and caregivers who are members of our patient council. We've highlighted 2 key members here. In the top photo, you can see Christine Caron, and then in the bottom photo, you can see Christine Russell and her daughter, Ellie. All 3 are sepsis survivors. And both Christine and Christine have been strong advocates within Sepsis Canada for the formation of a patient council, and then also for building support systems within our network for sepsis patients and caregivers. We're in the early stages of forming the patient council, and we're currently discussing the role that the council will play within Sepsis Canada and how the council will prioritize projects that are of interest to them. So these steps are being done with the sepsis patients and caregivers. And then once we are ready, we'll start engaging our network researchers and clinicians and have them integrated and working with the patient council. We're also creating compensation guidelines for engagement of patient partners that will be in line with CIHR's compensation guidelines. And these guidelines will be distributed to the entire network once they've been reviewed and approved by our executive committee and then also our steering committee. So that's just something to keep your eyes out for in the future that will be coming out. Next slide. Yeah, so with that, I'll hand it over to Bree so she can give us an update on communications.
Thanks, Nubia. So I chose this little illustration kind of strategically in that when done well, I think communications is not just a blast outwards, it's creating a network so that the information flows both ways. So a lot of what we're doing right now is creating those relationships. So more concretely, what we've done so far is that we've established our branding, and we did so through a community engagement process to get an idea of what our community, including the patient community, wanted to see in a Sepsis Canada logo. From there, we developed the style guide, and that's kind of a rule book to make sure that our messaging stays consistent. We have a monthly newsletter that updates everyone on opportunities, new publications, events, that sort of thing. So I'll also invite you, if anything comes up that you think would be of interest to the Sepsis Canada community, please be in touch. I would love to hear about it. We've also established the first bit of our social media presence, and that is our Twitter account. So you'll see me plug this several times. Please follow us on Twitter at Sepsis Canada. Tag us in any of your research updates because we definitely want to know what's going on. And lastly, we have launched a very first draft of our website. So we have a website out there, sepsiscanada.ca, and now we're busy filling it with content. We've also established our communications working group. We're very lucky to have in our network members, including trainees that have backgrounds or a special interest in communications. So far, we've held one meeting, and this group informs our overall communication strategy and also advises on individual projects. So what can we do for you? So first, we can help amplify the reach of your research. So this can be as simple as a tweet or more involved with a full press release and media strategy. Please reach out if you have any new publications that you think would be of interest, either within our own network or with the larger community. We can design assets that are related to your project or your research. For an example of that would be a logo specific to your project with the Sepsis Canada branding, or something like creating visual assets like infographics. If you think your research would be best communicated graphically, please be in touch and we'll see what we can do. And lastly, I just leave that open as an invitation. If you aren't sure what you need, please reach out. We, particularly with our working group, we have a lot of experts involved that can brainstorm ideas and help plan the best way to get your research out there. So I'm going to hand it back over to Nubia.
Okay, thank you so much, Bree. Yeah, so I'm going to speak a little bit to projects and programs, and then Dr. Lamontagne will also be sharing some information on upcoming funding here. So next slide. So this is an overview of the 8 projects and then 2 programs that were submitted as part of the original grant application to CIHR. You can see that the projects span the 3 Sepsis Canada teams and then have leadership from early to senior career researchers. When you look at the table on the left-hand side, you can see the name of the projects, then you can see which team each project belongs to, and then the team leading each of those projects. And then at the bottom, you can also see 2 programs that will be led by Dr. Fontella and then Dr. Lamontagne. I'm going to be speaking to those 2 programs a little bit more in depth in the upcoming slides. we have created a 3-step process for refining these projects and programs, and it includes our steering committee. Several of the projects have started moving through this 3-step process, and I'll give an overview of what those 3 steps are. So next slide. Here's an overview of what that 3-step process looks like. Step 1 includes the development of a proposal. This would be a standard research proposal. So we ask researchers to outline the background, objective, methods, etc. of their research proposal. Step 2 involves getting engagement from stakeholders both within Sepsis Canada and then outside of Sepsis Canada in that field of research. And we've also encouraged researchers to speak with patient partners so that we can make sure that all of these projects are patient and family centered. The goal of engaging the wider community is to bring together researchers and patient partners from across Canada to gain wide support behind these research proposals. And then step 3 involves presentation of those proposals and that stakeholder engagement summary to the steering committee. The steering committee looks at the strengths, the weaknesses, potential threats and opportunities to the proposals and gives that feedback back to the team leads, and then eventual approval of those proposals. So as I mentioned before, all of our projects and programs listed in the previous table are following this 3-step process. Next slide. So one of the programs that we had outlined in that grant application was a training program, and we're currently in the process of developing that training program. So we have a training committee made up of patient partners and researchers with expertise across the 4 pillars of research, and then they also have experience developing adult learning programs. The committee is led by Dr. Patricia Fontella from McGill University. The objective of the training program will be to create a single cohesive training and mentoring program in sepsis research for highly qualified personnel and patient partners that spans across the 4 pillars of health research and then engages all 3 teams. We plan to evaluate the implementation process and the effectiveness of the training program throughout the life of Sepsis Canada. And essentially what we want this training program to do is facilitate skills acquisition and experience in sepsis research, strengthen the sustainability of Sepsis Canada by providing trainees with links to employment and research collaboration opportunities in their field of study. And then we also want to create a community of Sepsis Canada graduates to foster engagement in sepsis research and collaboration. In terms of what I mean when I say highly qualified personnel, so we've kept that definition quite broad for now. It includes graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, research associates, coordinators or assistants, as well as technicians, lab managers, and healthcare professionals. And then, as I mentioned before, this training program will also be open to and geared towards patient partners. Currently, we're at the point where we're developing the proposal for what this training program exactly will look like, and it will have to be reviewed by our steering committee. So that leads me to the next slide. So we're actually looking to hear from Sepsis Canada members as we develop this training program and figure out what the content would look like. So as a Sepsis Canada member, if you have any research personnel or trainees that you think might be interested in this training program, please feel free to pass the survey along to them, or you can complete the survey yourself. It's a 10-minute survey, and essentially it asks questions around what content should be included within the training program. And it'll eventually help us inform what the training program looks like. You don't need to be a Sepsis Canada member to take part in the survey. So as I mentioned before, feel free to pass it around to members within your own networks, as we do want to hear from a wider community as to what this training program could include. And then I do want to mention as well that links to this survey, and we have another survey coming up here, will be included in a post-webinar email to Sepsis Canada members. So with that, next slide, I'll pass it over to Dr. Lamontagne.
Thanks, Nubia. So as Nubia mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, our top priority when the network was launched was to refine and then fund the projects that were described in broad strokes in our successful application to CIHR. Now that this is underway, we are ready to take on a next step, which is also something that was mentioned in the original application, and that is a plan to provide seed funding for projects that would be submitted or proposed by Sepsis Canada members. So we are ready to launch, and for this inaugural call for proposals that may benefit from this seed funding opportunity, we would like again to hear from you and receive some input from the Sepsis Canada community, hoping that we can actually model this this funding opportunity according to your needs and priorities. So a small, very brief survey was created, which you can complete by following this link, which will be provided to you if you don't you don't have to write it down. In the survey, you'll have an opportunity to tell us, for example, if you feel that the first call for seed funding should target a specific group, for example, trainees, and whether you can help prioritize the topics which are which would be the focus of this first call for seed funding. So there will be various questions. On the previous slide, you saw that we are eager to receive feedback from you, from the network members. CIHR is also obviously an important stakeholder and is helping us build this architecture, and we'll also receive your input and contribute to help us organize this these seed funding opportunities in the future. So your input will be greatly appreciated, and we hope to have these opportunities ready in a very near future. Thank you. Next slide.
Yeah, so with that, we're just going to give Dr. Lamontagne and then Dr. Fox-Robichaud the opportunity to highlight some progress from two key teams within our network. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Lamontagne. Next slide.
Yes, yeah. So, well, this in terms of progress, there is one particularly piece of good news that we felt we wanted to share early on with you, as it bears on Sepsis Canada activities. And many of you have heard already, and if not, you're hearing this good news for the first time today. CIHR recently funded last month the Canadian Network of Network for clinical trials aimed at COVID-19. So this network of network means to expand the existing networks invested in activities for clinical research and clinical trials in particular, of which Sepsis Canada is part of. So under the leadership of Rob Fowler, chair of the Canadian Critical Care Trials Group, Sepsis Canada has had an important role in preparing the successful application for the network of networks. And accordingly, a number of projects that were already on the Sepsis Canada agenda are now benefiting from this collaboration with the network of networks, which has many positive impacts. Sepsis Canada is relieved from the sole responsibility of funding these projects, which can perhaps help expedite the delivery of these projects and their scope as well. So in a very near future, you can expect to hear more about how this collaboration and this federation of networks will positively impact the Sepsis Canada activities.
We also wanted to highlight some of the work that's been happening in our preclinical group. The National Preclinical Sepsis Platform is led by 3 very active young investigators, Asher Mendelson, Manoj Laloo, and Braden McDonald. Under this or mentorship of Dr. Paul Koobs of the University of Calgary and Patricia Liao, who is the chair of the Canadian Critical Care Translational Biology Group. This group has been exceptionally successful, even without dipping into the Sepsis Canada funds to date. They have been awarded 4 CIHR grants, an initial planning grant that got the NPSP off the ground. They've had a project grant and a SPORE grant to look at patient engagement, and another project grant to look at the role of sex in preclinical research. In addition to that, they also have 3 publications already accepted or in print. You may have seen one, they've got one on biological sex in sepsis that's coming out in Critical Care Explorations. The framework paper from the original CIHR planning grant is coming out in Intensive Care Medicine Experimental. And they have a review article on the role of sex and gender in sepsis research coming out in Shock. And we want to really champion this group of young investigators who've been meeting, I would say, almost monthly, collaborating with veterinarians since the beginning of that. They've also been looking and working with patient partners on outcomes. For all of you that are interested in biomedical research, I would reach out to this group. They are looking to spread what is an interesting platform of multi-center preclinical trials, pilot studies related to that, with a particular focus on looking at sex and gender, as we discussed, or sex particularly in preclinical models, but also expanding to look at diabetes and obesity, which was part of our original request from CIHR, because the Institute of Diabetes and Nutrition has been a major funder for the network. Next slide.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Lamontagne and Dr. Fox-Robichaud. I just wanted to mention to all of our network members, if you have any progress that you want us to highlight, either in newsletter or in future webinars, just make sure that you share that progress with Bree, and then we'll make sure that we highlight all of the work that our network members are doing. And then we'll also be sharing the contact information for the NPSP if you are interested in collaborating on their innovative platform. So with that, if we can go to the next slide. With that, we finished the presentation of the webinar a few minutes early, so that gives us some more time for questions if there are any. So I would encourage anybody to ask questions that you have that we may be able to answer, or if you have questions after the webinar, feel free to send me an email and I can either answer that for you or I can help direct that question. So Dr. Lamontagne, do we have any questions?
We have one from Claudio, who mentions having received funding for a clinical trial, for a phase 2 trial, and his interest in engaging the network to seek potential collaborations and develop this project. And so the question is, what are the steps to engage Sepsis Canada for interested sites and a support grant? So, Nubia already provided a partial answer to this. So, and Bree's summary of our communications also is partly addresses your question. So, via the newsletter, the website, and perhaps other tools that are in development that Bree can speak to, there's definitely a way to engage members and anyone who has access to the newsletter, actually, and the website. So that's definitely a good place to start. And clinical research, as Allison might have mentioned, or I don't know whether you see this part, but another good way is to directly engage members of Team 3. So members invested in clinical research would typically be part of Team 3, and so we can offline help you connect with Team 3 members, Claudio. Bree, do you want to speak to what is in development and perhaps might facilitate this type of communication within the network?
Yeah, I would just invite you, Claudio, to reach out and we can come up with a strategy if you want to engage the larger network, or if you want to communicate anything in particular. On the spot, I'm not exactly sure what we would suggest, but I would like to learn more, and we can go to our communications working group, or we can come up with a strategy to help you out with that, but we are available.
We have more questions coming in. So some on the chat, some on the question and answer. Maybe if you can prioritize using the question and answer button, then that helps us avoid forgetting or missing out on any questions. So there is one here, Allison, that perhaps you will be answering. Diana is asking whether we have reached out to the Diabetes Action Canada, a national SPORE network, as a collaborator.
Thanks for that question, Diana. I did reach out at one point, and you may or may not recall those conversations, but perhaps you and I should circle back to that SPORE group to see if there are additional part of their SPORE network who would be interested in participating. I will encourage the members to recall that that institute is particularly interested in a couple of things: the responsive sepsis in obese individuals. I recall Brian Rowe saying us needed to solve the obesity paradox. And for many people who may not understand that obesity paradox, there seems to be in the literature a relative protective effect of obese individuals. I think it's probably bimodal. We know that very frail individuals may not be able to tolerate sepsis, but similarly, I think the morbid obese may have an increased risk. The other thing is that diabetic individuals, as many of you know, are also at risk of wound infections. And Diana, let's follow up with that, because I think Diabetes Action Canada as a SPORE group is a great one to find individuals who might be willing to participate.
Another question, Allison, from Mark, asking about developments on the pediatric and neonatal front. Well, I can maybe start and Allison can complete, but we've made sure that we actively engage and broaden the steering committee with members who are experts in pediatrics. So our steering committee has been is now a bit larger and has actively invited individuals with this expertise. Allison, any more you want to say about pediatrics?
Yeah, so I don't think we purposely excluded pediatric sepsis, Mark. It will be included, and we will certainly be looking for seed funding that may include pediatric sepsis. We've asked certainly some of our population health group to look at pediatric sepsis, not just adult sepsis, for that incidence. The neonatal sepsis is a different question. The neonatal group already has a broad Canadian and indeed international network. And so when that call originally went out, and Ryan, we can unmute you if need be, if you want to ask or answer that question specifically, but our understanding was that yes, we could include pediatric sepsis, but that neonatal sepsis already had their own research network.
Question for Peter, asking about our, if we reached out to scientists who are not typical or usual suspects, I guess, in this kind of network, and thinking specifically of mathematical modelers and social scientists. That is in part the focus of this stakeholder engagement process that is part of our system, or where we refine the projects that have been summarized in broad strokes in the original proposal. So that is part of, one reason why we embedded this engagement step, I guess. And so the steering committee, reserves itself the the opportunity to suggest or recommend that specific projects are be shared and with certain stakeholders. And so your comment about mathematicians and social scientists certainly is relevant for some of the projects that we have or that we will look at in the very near future. And so there has been suggestions made to engage, for example, individuals who are heavily involved in the SPORE Canadian data platform. And that is something we are working towards and hope to continue to do and do more of.
I'd add to that, Peter. The other thing is that we do have, as you recall, a couple people who are PhDs with an interest in knowledge translation and social scientists, but we also have geographers as part of our team. So we really are thinking in a number of areas, but love to hear new connections. If you have somebody who you think might be interested, who's outside of our typical Sepsis Canada research network, just reach out to Francois, myself, Nubia. We have a mechanism now for adding new scientists into Sepsis Canada, either as collaborators or co-applicants. And we can get them the interinstitutional agreement if that needs to be as well. Maybe I'll take the next one, Francois, which is Mansour's question about will there be any face-to-face retreats in the future. Mansour, I hope so. I'd love to see this pandemic over. But as many of us are physicians, people aren't letting us move too many places at all. I think we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with the vaccination program across the country. I can tell you I'm the co-chair of the scientific committee for the World Congress of Critical Care. And we made a decision last week for a meeting that's happening in September to go virtual. So I think we're going to have to take our lead from some of our members who are sitting at public health tables. John Marshall, I see, is on here today, and Shrin Murthy. We're going to have to take a lead from some of our members who are sitting at those tables when it's going to be safe to be able to have face-to-face meetings.
We have a question from Brent mentioning that many Sepsis Canada members lead or supervise biobanks or tissue banks, and others may be interested in accessing tissue banks and biobanks, and is asking whether Sepsis Canada can help better leverage these banks to help answer fundamental questions. Brent's particular interest, as he mentions, is metabolomics. So this has started. So this is one of the projects that has progressed. As mentioned in our proposal, we set out to create a comprehensive catalog of study material. So that encompasses both study data, but also biobanks and biological specimens. And so that work has started. That is one of the projects that has immediately found itself supported not only by Sepsis Canada, but also by the recently funded network of networks. And so the scope of this project has been broadened a little bit. But so to answer your question, in the context of this effort, there's already been work done to catalog, where study data and where biological specimens lie. And that information, once we finish sort of building this catalog, is going to be shared broadly. We can already, before the full database is completed, we can already, but similar to what we might do in the very near future to address Claudio's needs, we can disseminate via, in our newsletter and on our website information about your specific biobank if you're eager to seek collaborators in the short term. But in the relatively near future, the information about all of these databases and biobanks will be shared with our members with a view to facilitate access to any potentially interested stakeholder. So that is coming in the relatively near future, before the end of the year. Allison or Nubia, do you want to add something to this?
No, I think Brent, it's a case of just starting to build those connections. We know who has biobanks from the translational biology group. You know, Francois is going to take some of the infrastructure funding and start to reach out and better catalog who has what across the country related to sepsis, both from a trials database perspective and from the biobanking. One of the things that we really want to do is have a governance structure, and I think that's going to be Francois's real focus for the the first year.
And Claudio, I see your second question. You could contact Nubia and myself, and we can link you in rapidly. We have started cataloging the studies. So a lot of the biological specimens have been collected in the context of RCTs or cohorts. So we've started there. And so not every individual in charge of a biobank has been contacted. This has just been recently revised and refined, and but you could expect to be contacted sometime soon. But you know, to expedite this, if you can reach out to Nubia and myself, we'll loop you in ahead of ahead of time, immediately.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I see that Claudio asked a question, and the link has been shared by Allison, but I don't know that everyone sees the chat, Allison. So I guess so, yes. Okay, well, so the link has been shared on the chat. And
I'll also include the link in the post-webinar email that we'll send out with all the surveys.
Yeah, thanks. And Claudio asks how we can coordinate the fundamental questions being asked. So maybe to that point, though, in the near future, our view is to disseminate the information and facilitate the communication between members, not really to sort of centralize and prioritize questions that may be answered with this with the various biobanks. So rather than trying to centralize and you know, pick one research question, this is sort of a decentralized. This is viewed as a decentralized federation of biobanks that already exist across the country, and in the short term, the objective is to allow for collaborations or facilitate collaborations between Sepsis Canada members, not so much to lead a single or prioritize a single research project or a number of research projects. So in the immediate future, the focus is really to have the information and make it available so that these collaborations can occur. No more questions on the question and answer screen.
All right. Are there any other questions from any of the members that have attended the webinar? Okay. If we have no further questions, then we'll give everybody back 15 minutes of their time, which isn't a bad thing these days. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We really appreciate you taking the time to connect with us. And then, as we mentioned before, should you have any questions, feel free to send us an email. We're available through there. And yeah, keep us informed on your updates through Twitter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is